This girl took her mom's life on Facebook Live. On January 8th of this year, 28-year-old Tenanzin Oris Beltran went with her mom, 55-year-old Olivia Lucia Beltran, to a Santa Rosa police station. Tenanzin needed to go there because she needed to pick up her vehicle after it was impounded following an earlier chase. While at the police station, she filmed herself waving an open pocket knife in front of everybody. An officer stated that she was too mentally unstable to drive, but they still let her go home. At 5 p.m. that same day, Tenanzin was on Facebook Live when she stabbed her mother. Viewers of the live ended up contacting police to let them know what they had just witnessed. When officers arrived to the scene, they noticed that Tenanzin was on her balcony holding a knife in her hand. Right next to her was her mother, and her clothes were just soaked in blood. Tenanzin failed to respond to commands, so a group of officers broke through the front door and she was arrested. Olivia suffered from numerous stab wounds and was rushed to a local hospital. Unfortunately, the surgeons were unable to overcome the extensive life-threatening injuries and she passed away. Detectives worked with Meta/Facebook and had the video removed. Tenanzin was arrested on one count of murder and was being held without bail at Marin County Jail. To this day, there is still no clear motive on why she did this to her mother.
This man willingly allowed himself to be eaten alive by a cannibal. 43-year-old Armando Brands was an engineer from Berlin who always fantasized about being cannibalized by another human being. So, in 2001, he began searching the website Cannibal Cafe, which was, yes, a legitimate website, for anyone willing to cook him and eat him. It's on the Cannibal Cafe website that Brands met 30-year-old computer technician Armin Muse. Armin also had a fantasy of cannibalizing human flesh, and so over the next few weeks, him and Brands messaged each other back and forth, discussing the best way to cook Brands' flesh and then dispose of his body after they were done. Finally, on March 9, 2001, Armando traveled to Armin's apartment and willingly allowed himself to be tied up before Armin began to try and chew off Armando's penis. Armin found that the penis was too chewy to bite off, so he instead castrated Armando with a knife before frying his severed penis in olive oil and then feeding it to him. After this, Armin proceeded to kill Armando by stabbing him in the neck and letting him bleed out in the bathtub for over 3 hours before he finally succumbed to his wounds. After Armando died, Armin proceeded to cut up his body into large chunks, storing them in a freezer, and over the next 6 months, he would consume over 44 pounds of Armando's flesh. Armin would be caught 6 months later after looking for another victim on the Cannibal Cafe website. Now, at first, prosecutors weren't sure how to go about this case because Armando willingly allowed all this to happen, and they know this because Armin recorded the entire thing, the castration, eating of the penis, and the entire time Armando was telling Armin that he wanted more. However, since people can't consent to their own murder, Armin was eventually found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. However, to this day, he still gets weekly visits out to the city where he can roam about and do as he pleases.
Because you are guilty, aren't you? Are you guilty, sir?
I said my plea, exactly.
Much as it was my honor and privilege to hear the sister survivors, it is my honor and privilege to sentence you. Because, sir, you do not deserve to walk outside of a prison ever again. You have done nothing to control those urges. The decision to assault was precise, calculated, manipulative, devious, despicable. I'm giving you 175 years, which is 2,100 months. I've just signed your death warrant. I need everyone to be quiet.
These villagers dig up their dead family members every 3 years, and you won't believe why. These people are from a village in Indonesia, and during their Manim festival, they get their ancestors' corpses, clean them, then put them all out to dry, and dress them in new clothes as a ritual. And the reason is because they believe they're showing them love and respect.
The Legend of Bunnyman Bridge. In 1904, not far from this bridge in Fairfax County, Virginia, was a mental asylum. Nearby residents didn't like the fact that mental patients were near their new homes, so they had it shut down. While the patients were being transported, their bus crashed and all were found except for one, a patient named Douglas Griffin, who disappeared into the nearby woods. In the upcoming weeks, bodies of rabbits were found strewn about the woods as if someone was eating them. On Halloween night, Douglas Griffin struck and killed a group of teenagers that were hanging out underneath of the bridge. They were gutted and hanged like dead rabbits. Now there is a ton of variations of this urban legend, but there is a slight bit of truth behind the origin of it. There was a police report from 1970 that said a person dressed in all white threw a hatchet at somebody's car, and the person had something on their heads, and that is where people filled in the blanks with it being rabbit ears. There was another report of a man running around with a hatchet in a bunny suit also in 1970. Who knows, maybe there really was a killer bunny man.
This man has been sentenced to 100 years in prison after doing the unthinkable to his daughter. Tony Valles is a 66-year-old from Helena. On the 10th of July 2022, he was at home with his partner Heather. Tony's 8-year-old daughter Ariana and his 18-year-old son were also at the house at the time. Suddenly, 2 women entered the property who he believed were evicting him. He flew into a violent rage and grabbed a weapon from his bedroom. At this point, he began shooting. He shot Heather and she fell to the floor, and then he shot at his son. His 8-year-old daughter tried to escape and run from the terror, but she was hit with gunfire. She was on the stairs when she was hit by a bullet and she fell back. She tragically died after being rushed to hospital. After his daughter's death, Tony stated, "I'm sorry for all this. I can't undo what I've done. The pain and the misery will last a lifetime, and I'm sorry for all that." Tony was sentenced to serve 100 years in prison.
This is the most unsettling show I've seen in a while. Netflix just released a show called Baby Reindeer, where a man named Donnie is relentlessly stalked by a middle-aged woman named Martha. But it's based on a real story, and the guy it happened to is playing the main character. So let's talk about the real events the show portrays. So in the show, Martha's obsession with Donnie starts after he offers a cup of tea for free. And according to the creator, that is really what started her 4-year obsession with him. Also, over the course of the stalking, the real Martha sent the creator 41,071 emails, 744 tweets, 46 Facebook messages, 106 pages of letters, and 350 hours of voicemail messages. And the real texts and emails are featured in the show. One of the saddest real details of the show is that the creator does go to the police to try to report Martha, and they totally brush him off. They just don't feel like she's enough of a threat, even though she's showing up to all of his comedy shows, she's sending him that many messages, and she fully believes they're in a relationship. And the show is really interesting in that it portrays the gray area that the creator, Richard Gadd, faced while experiencing being stalked. This is a bit of a spoiler, but he himself was a survivor of sexual assault, so in a way, this kind of undying love was something that he craved. And in interviews, he says that he's not purely a victim, that this situation is really gray because sometimes he would indulge in the attention that she gave him. It's definitely worth watching if you haven't seen it already. It does get very intense at times, but let me know if you've seen it.
His life was taken for laugh reacting to a Facebook photo. This is 18-year-old Isaiah Craig Fitzgerald, and he was from Missouri. On May 25th of 2023, Isaiah had came across this photo of 20-year-old Tanner Watkins and his girlfriend. He reacts to the Facebook photo with a laughing emoji. Tanner ends up responding to Isaiah saying, "What's funny?" and an argument begins. Tanner then ends up telling Isaiah that they should meet at a park to fight after a heated exchange. At the agreed upon location, shots were fired from both vehicles. Isaiah was fatally shot and his girlfriend was seriously wounded. Police had responded to the scene after receiving reports of gunfire, and they stopped both vehicles as they were leaving. Isaiah was pronounced dead and his girlfriend was transported to a local hospital where doctors treated her injuries. Officers ended up confiscating weapons from both vehicles. Tanner and 18-year-old Caleb Ramsey were both taken into custody. Both pled not guilty to all charges and were acquitted in December of 2023. The judge had ordered a mistrial after the jury could not agree on a verdict. Tanner and Caleb were charged with 3 counts of murder, 3 counts of assault, unlawful use of a weapon, and 4 counts of armed criminal action.
The most terrifying prisoners of all time. This is Jamie Osuna, the man with 1,000 faces. In 2017, Jamie was sentenced to life in prison for the 2011 murder and torture of a woman from Bakersfield. During his court case, you can see him smirking, rolling his eyes, and mocking the family of the deceased, even giving a thumbs up as the judge announces his sentence. From there, he is transported to Corcoran State Prison, where things got worse. Way worse. He is given a cellmate, Luis Romero, who had spent more than 2 decades in prison himself. On March 9th, 2019, guards checked their cell and find the most gruesome scene. Romero had been beheaded and several of his body parts were removed and fashioned into a necklace worn by Jamie. Ha 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 had been written on the wall in blood, as well as the man with 1,000 faces.
Prosecutors in the Bryan Kohberger case have said that they are not buying his alibi. Kohberger's defense has spent months giving very few details about his alibi, essentially only saying that he was out driving around the night of the murders and that nobody could corroborate this. But then a couple weeks ago, they said that they have an expert witness that can testify about Kohberger's cell phone movements the night of the murders, placing him away from the house. But prosecutors are not buying it, and specifically, they said, quote, the defendant's alibi lacks specificity and should state the specific place or places at which the defendant claims to have been at the time of the alleged offense and the names and addresses of the witnesses upon whom he intends to rely to establish such alibi, according to Idaho Code 19-519. So essentially, the prosecution is saying that Kohberger's alibi is not specific enough, and just because an expert witness can testify about his cell phone movements does not mean that it's a corroborating alibi, and that they need specific witnesses to be able to verify his alibi for it to be a proper alibi. The next hearing for the case has been scheduled for May 2nd. Other updates in the Kohberger case include that prosecutors are also moving to have the following hearing after the May 2nd hearing on May 14th be under seal. This is essentially to protect the information that is being disseminated to the public that could potentially taint the jury pool. And speaking of the potential jury pool, the judge has ruled that the defense can continue their surveys of the potential jury pool to determine if the potential jury pool knows about Bryan Kohberger, because the defense is trying to get a change of venue. But that's all for the latest updates with Bryan Kohberger. Things are just continuing to slowly move along.
The longest prison sentences in history. At number 5 is Joseph Legend. He has served 67 years and 54 days in prison, and he was released earlier this year. He was convicted of murder at the age of 15. He was released at 83. At number 4 is Joseph Phillips, who served 68 years and 236 days. He was convicted in 1952 of raping a 5-year-old girl. He was paroled in March 2021. Third, with only 9 more days in prison, is Paul Goodell Jr. He served 68 years and 245 days. He was incarcerated in 1911 at the age of 17. He was released in 1980 at the age of 86. Once released, he died in a retirement home 7 years later at the age of 93. In second place, and the only non-American on the list, is an Australian man by the name of Charles Fawcett. He was sentenced to life imprisonment after murdering an elderly man and stealing his boots. And before number 1, write "I'll go to prison" next in the comments and leave your autocorrect finished. He'll write that you'll go to jail. And in number 1, it's Francis Clifford Smith. He's currently serving 72 years and 90 days. He was also sentenced to death for the murder of a night watchman on his way out of a nightclub. But his sentence was changed to life imprisonment in 1954, 2 hours before his scheduled execution. He was lucky.
These signs of a societal collapse in a country are so often things you would never even think about. For example, a shocking study was recently published showing a concerning rise in people being found so long after death in the UK that their body had decomposed. And we're not talking about just days and weeks here. The study cited a number of cases like 38-year-old Laura Winham, who struggled with mental health problems and was found in a mummified, almost skeletal state at her flat in 2021, more than 3 years after she had died. She passed away in 2017 2017, 3 years before the pandemic even began. The body of another 61-year-old woman, Shalia, was found badly decomposed in her flat in London in 2022, 2 years after she had died. The study said that men were more than twice as likely as women to be discovered long after death in a decomposed state, and also linked this tragic trend to loneliness, societal breakdown, and a loss of people's social connection. And that is sadly why
a 20-year-old cold case has had a major breakthrough after an eerie twist led to police identifying a teenage girl's remains. Midtown Jane Doe was found mysteriously entombed in cement in a former New York hotspot during construction in 2003. Investigators believe she was fatally strangled, bound with electrical wire, and wrapped in a carpet before being cemented into the building's basement. Now, Midtown Jane Doe has been identified as Patricia Kathleen McGlone, a girl from Brooklyn who was last seen in the late 1960s. DNA from a woman killed in the 9/11 attacks, also named Patricia, helped authorities identify the girl, as the two were related.
Gruesome Facts You Didn't Know, Part 262. On August 17th of 1980, 9-week-old Azaria Chamberlain disappeared from the tent during a family camping trip. Mother Lindy reported she saw a wild dog leaving the tent and believed that her baby had been taken by dingoes in the Australian outback. Despite a frantic search, nothing was found and no body was ever discovered. Extensive press coverage of the incident portrayed the couple as monsters, and they received multiple death threats. Believing that the police were feeding information to the media, the entire court case was a madhouse and the public opinion hugely divided. Some believing they murdered their own child, others believing that dingoes really did take their baby. Their religious background stirred up rumors that cult-like activity had taken place, and at the time, dingoes were not generally seen as dangerous. But despite all the horrible and negative publicity, Lindy and husband Michael continued to plead their innocence. But on October 29th of 1982, she was sentenced to life in prison for murder, with Michael being charged as an accessory and sentenced to 18 months. After she spent 4 long years in prison and had no more legal routes to take, new evidence was discovered. Azaria's jacket was found partially buried in a highly populated dingo area. This led to her prison release in 1988, and both her and Michael were completely exonerated of all charges. In 2012, a coroner issued the final report on the case, confirming that their baby had been taken and eaten by dingoes.
Breaking news, the remains of 6 women have been found inside of a man's apartment. Authorities say the investigation began when he allegedly broke into a neighbor's apartment on April 16th. From there, he essayed and strangled a 17-year-old girl. The victim's mother returned home shortly after and saw the man leaving. It was at that point he slashed her throat and then fled. According to authorities, the mother was able to survive, however, the daughter did not. With the mother's assistance, they were able to identify the suspect only as, quote, Miguel. After the incident, they searched his apartment and, quote, clearly indicated we are looking at a possible serial killer of women. Authorities also confirmed that notebooks were located that, quote, may well be narrations of the acts that Miguel carried out against his victims. In addition, they found cell phones and ID cards belonging to multiple women. They said that 5 of the ID cards found belonged to women who have been located alive. However, they did not specify how many belonged to women who are still missing or deceased. Prosecutors did confirm that there were remains of 6 women found in his rented room. Quote, other biological material was also found in the rooms. In addition to the ID cards and cell phones found, they also found bones, BLOOD, and a saw. At this time, authorities have not provided any further details. To stay up to date on this case, make sure you click the playlist below. What do you guys think? Drop in the comments.
This is a cannibal that used the gay dating app Grindr to find victims so he could eat them. So on Christmas Eve 2019, 25-year-old Kevin Bacon told his roommate that he was going out for the evening to meet up with a man that he had recently been talking to on the dating app Grindr. Now, after 3 days, Kevin failed to come home or contact any of his friends or family, and they started to get worried, and they eventually went to the police to issue a missing persons warning. Later on the day that he was reported missing, Kevin's car was actually found abandoned in a parking lot, along with all of his clothes and his cell phone. Using his cell phone, police were able to actually access his Grindr account and see that the last person he had messaged on there was a man named Mark Lutunsky. Police were able to track down Mark Lutunsky, and they asked him if they could look around his house for a bit, and he actually happily agreed. However, when police went down to the basement, they made an absolutely horrific discovery. Hanging from the rafters by his ankles was the nude body of Kevin Bacon. His throat had been slashed, his body had been drained of blood, and most shocking of all, he had actually been castrated. Upon further questioning, Mark happily admitted that he had actually castrated Kevin and then fried up his testicles and ate them, and that he was planning to use a food dehydrator on the rest of Kevin's body so he could preserve it and eat it later. After Mark was arrested for the death of Kevin, police actually discovered that he had had several previous run-ins with the law in the months leading up to the death. 2 men on 2 previous occasions actually called 911 stating that they had escaped from Mark's basement after he drugged them, tied them up, and was planning to torture them. In both cases, police just chalked it up to a gay dispute and they didn't actually look further into it. Mark was quickly found guilty of Kevin's death and now he's currently serving life in prison.
This man vanished from the top of a mountain in New York and was found 6 days later in California with no memory how he got there. This is easily one of the most bizarre disappearances and reappearances that I've ever heard of. If you've never heard of this story before, buckle up because it's wild. 49-year-old Canadian firefighter Danny was skiing at White Base Mountain in New York when he vanished. It was the last day of their ski trip. All of Danny's friends had gotten tired and had headed back down to the ski lodge to wait for Danny, who wanted to do one more trip down the mountain, but Danny never returned. Danny was missing on top one of the highest mountains in the area. Everyone's thinking that there must have been some kind of terrible accident. All of Danny's belongings are still back at his resort, his car, his passport, his ID, his phone. A huge manhunt was being done on the mountain, but as the days went by, the chances of finding Danny alive were slim. Then, 6 days after he vanished, Danny was found alive on the complete other side of the country over 2,500 miles away in California. Danny was still wearing the ski outfit that he disappeared in 6 days earlier with a new haircut, a new cell phone, and no memory of the past 6 days. Eventually, Danny was able to recall that he believes that he was the passenger in a big rig truck at one of those points and thought that he must have suffered some kind of head injury. But he had an examination at a hospital that found that he had 0 injuries at all. Extensive investigations were done in both California and New York that brought forth no answers. 6 months after Danny disappeared, he was able to recall a couple more vague details, but honestly it wasn't much. Now here are some of the most highly believed theories that you can find online. Could Danny have gotten a concussion on the mountain that resulted in some kind of memory loss? It sounds plausible, but a lot of doctors that have looked at this case have said that it's unlikely because memory loss after head trauma usually only lasts at most 48 hours, not 6 days. And apparently Danny didn't even have any injuries to begin with when he was found. Some also believe that maybe Danny was abducted by aliens who dropped him back off on the wrong side of the country. Some people also believe that maybe Danny wanted to disappear on purpose and start a new life, but then got cold feet. Honestly, I have no idea what I think happened. This story for real sounds like something out of fiction. To this day, we still have no idea what happened to Danny during those 6 days that he was missing, but let me know what you think happened in the comments.